Okay, we're back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the perception of light. And to start off, we're going to talk about how we perceive color. In our eyes, we have two types of photoreceptors. A photoreceptor is a fancy word for cells that are sensitive to light. So photo meaning light, and receptor meaning taking in. And the two types are rods and cones. You've probably heard about this before. So rods are responsible for low light vision, which means when it's dark out, when there's not a lot of light coming into our eyes, most of our vision is through this, or through these. These are also spread out more along the back of the eye. So when it's dark, you'll notice you actually have superior vision or better vision than usual peripherally. Cones are responsible for highlight vision, so during the day when the lights are on, when the sun's out. And it's what allows us to see color. So we're going to look at those a little bit more. So there are three types of cones that each sense a different wavelength of light. It's important to note that the cones don't actually determine color themselves. They're determining wavelengths, like we talked about previously. So we have some cones for short wavelengths. That would be like these blue ones here, right? Those are that's the shorter wavelength of the spectrum down in this purple-blue region. We have some cones for medium wavelengths, which would be kind of this green area, right? Those guys there. And we have some cones for long wavelengths, so reds, oranges, yellows, somewhere in there. And these gray ones here, those are the rods. So we have three types of cones. And when light hits those cones that are located, you can notice this kind of yellow line here. A lot of that is where the rods and cones are located. So a lot of it's along the back of our eye. So after light hits the cones in our eyes, it's transmitted to our brain. And the signal travels along our optic nerve, which is that, I don't know if you guys have seen it in, I don't know, cartoons or pictures, like anatomical pictures. There's a nerve that comes out the back of our eye. And that goes all the way up to our brain. So the signal travels along that optic nerve to our visual cortex, which is part of our brain. And the visual cortex determines what cones were stimulated. And the strength of the signal is what determines like the intensity. So then you finally perceive color. So between the cones that are stimulated and how strongly they were stimulated, that is processed by our brain, and then we actually perceive the color. So there's a delay. It's short, but there's a delay between what light is going into our eyes and what we're actually perceiving. It's kind of a weird thing to think about. In the dark, the majority of the light is processed by the rods, like we said. This means that you see a lot less color, almost like you're watching something in grayscale. This picture is in grayscale. Okay, I'm not trying to fool you, but next time you're outside, and it doesn't work super well in the city because there's so many streetlights, but I don't know if you guys have ever been to a cabin or out at the lake or camping or something. You'll notice if you're looking around in the dark where it's like maybe twilight or maybe even darker than that, where it's just light enough to see things and your eyes get used to seeing things in the dark, you'll notice you see a lot less color. Everything is a lot less saturated. Reds and greens and blues, you can still identify them as reds and greens and blues, but they don't look the same as they do in bright light. So color constancy is one of the reasons they look like red, green, and blue, even though maybe we can't perceive it that well. And it's a neat little phenomenon we'll talk about here. So color constancy is where your past visual experiences influence your perception of color. So if you know something is purple, but a red light is put on it, your brain can pick apart that there's a red light on that object, so it looks slightly different, and I know the base object is purple. Surrounding colors can also do weird stuff to your perception of color, kind of in a similar vein. So you guys have probably seen this optical illusion before. You can look it up in more detail. But basically just look up color constancy if you're curious about this and do an image search on Google. And you'll see that if we were to color sample this square A and color sample this square B, they would actually be the exact same color. But they don't look like it. And it's because the surrounding blocks and the fact that something's in shadow, it messes with our brain and we see this is lighter and this is darker, but these are identical colors. We'll watch a TED Talk maybe on, what is it, Wednesday? Watch a TED Talk on Wednesday about this, and there's a lot of fun little cool like optics experiments in it. So people have cones to perceive color, and there's some variation in cones, and not just in humans. So many animals have more or less cones than humans do. Insects and birds, and I think fish as well, which I thought was weird, can have four types of cones, or often have four types of cones, allowing them to see ultraviolet light, which is an even shorter wavelength. If we go back to here, UV is down here. So they have ultraviolet light cones, and they see differently than we do. So this is what we would see. And then this is maybe something like what they would see. The colors are probably off, but this is a picture taken with a UV camera, or a camera that can pick up UV. And then I believe color is added. So we don't actually know what UV looks like, um, because I don't think it's possible for us to know what it looks like. I'm not totally sure on that. That's kind of like a psychology science question mixture. I'm not totally sure where that lands, but somebody's basically colored this photo, uh, at least in the pattern that bees would see. And it's the same down here. We see this plain yellow flower with the center being black, and they see kind of this red ring, or it wouldn't be red, but this ring around the center. And you'll notice a lot of these things, a lot of these flowers, if you see other UV pictures, there are some where maybe they have strips leading towards the middle, almost like landing strips. Oftentimes, the UV picture of flowers represent almost something like a bullseye, a target, or arrows like landing strips or something. And the thought is that the flowers are actually directing the bees, who are pollinators, towards where the flower wants them to go, which is a really cool evolutionary thing. Dogs are actually, you've probably heard of this. People say dogs see in black and white. It's probably not quite true, but dogs have fewer types and numbers of cones than humans, meaning they probably perceive less color. The fact that they do have cones means they probably do see in some color, and they do see some shades of color, but they have fewer. Okay, color blindness. This is where some of you might discover something. Um, so some people have variations in their cones as well. It's not just animals. Person to person, there's differences as well. Color blindness can be caused from cones being absent or not functioning properly. So sometimes cones might detect a different wavelength than they're supposed to, um, or some people might just not have a type of cone, so they can't see that shade of color. Red-green color blindness is the most common. You've probably heard of that before, followed by blue-yellow color blindness. I've actually never, I know a lot of people who are red-green colorblind, but I've never met someone who's blue-yellow colorblind, I don't think. Maybe one at university, but it's not common. And both of these color blindnesses, and I think most color blindnesses, are more common in males because they're due to a recessive gene. So males tend to be more likely to have it. So chromatopsia is what we would call full color blindness. And there's a nice little diagram here where you'll notice it without a chromatopsia is on the left side. And day vision, we would see all these colors. Night vision, when it's mediated by rods, right, we would see something like this. With full chromatopsia, it's like blown out. It's totally washed out, because there's no perception of color. It's just very, very bright. Uh, Likely because, and I'm not sure, there might be different types or different reasons for chromatopsia. But my guess is that since they're perceiving everything with the rods and not cones, rods can't handle this much light, so the vision is extremely impaired. But you'll notice at night it's the exact same because there's no issue with the rods, right? So people with a chromatopsia will see things in monochrome, black and white, grayscale, and because it's determined by the rods here, it's can cause vision issues during the day for sure. All types of color blindness are generally caused through genetics, which is the most common, or there are some injury illnesses that can create color deficiencies. And there's quite a few. You can look them up if you want. I know diabetes was on there, and sickle cell anemia was on there. a couple others. So this is a good little story time. You might not know you're colorblind. A lot of people don't, um, because we'll jump down here. People learn to label colors correctly, even if they perceive them differently. So somebody might see what they think of as, or they see a certain shade, and somebody goes, "Oh yeah, that tree is green," and they go, "Oh, okay, that's the color green." But to them, it doesn't look green. It looks kind of like brown, or it looks like what somebody without color blindness would call brown. So they learn to label colors correctly, but they perceive them differently, which is a really kind of strange thing to think about. My friend Cole didn't know he was colorblind. He's red-green colorblind until he was in his late 20s or maybe like early 30s. I can't really remember when he was teaching a university or TAing a university course, and he was preparing a colorblind test, the one you see on the right here. And he was the idea of this colorblind test, for if there aren't any of you who are colorblind, is that there's a number right here in kind of these red dots, and it's an 8. And then the rest of it's these green dots. And if you're colorblind, you can't differentiate between those two. Or rather, if you have a type of colorblindness, you can't differentiate between those two. And same with here. We've got a green 27 right here, and then a red outline of dots. And the whole idea is that you give people a bunch of these swatches with these numbers, and these, sometimes there's shapes or stuff on them. And you say, okay, can you see what's in this picture? And somebody without red-green color blindness will say, oh, there's an 8 here, there's a 27 here. And somebody with it will say, I don't see anything. And Cole was preparing this test, and he would he would look at these swatches and be like, this is a stupid colorblind test. There's nothing written on these. And then somebody said, what? And he realized, or they realized at that point, that he couldn't see the numbers that were supposed to be in this test because he was red-green colorblind. So it's interesting to note that this test, for somebody who is red-green colorblind, they might be able to see this 27 because this is almost like a blue-green, and they might not be able to see this 8 because these are different shades of green and different shades of red. These ones, the one on the bottom has quite a bit more saturated colors, saturated shades, and color blindness is on a spectrum. It's on a continuum where some people see certain shades, some people don't. And I know Cole, his red-green color blindness, he can differentiate between some red and green colors, red and green shades. But there's a couple very specific shades of green that just look brown to him, and a couple specific shades of red that have overlap there too. Oh, I don't know if I mentioned, but someone with blue-yellow color blindness, this wouldn't affect them at all, right? They'd need a different type of test. And same with different types of color blindness. You'd have to administer a couple different types of tests. So the last thing we're going to talk about is called tetrachromacy. This is a really cool thing that I've learned a little bit about when I was in university, but didn't delve too far into. So I had the chance the other day to do this. So some women, human women, I don't know about other species, other females in other species. I don't know if this is a thing, but human women can sometimes produce a fourth type of cone, and they're called tetrachromats. So not all tetrachromats see more color than most people, but some do, which is really cool. So tetrachromats have another type of cone, and this is a piece of art by a tetrachromat uh, who is trying to capture the like vibrant colors that she sees in her art, which is kind of a cool idea. So we'll go to a picture here or a diagram to explain this. So in tetrachromacy, most people have this kind of the cone that detects short wavelengths, which is like this purple line here. The green one, which is the mid wavelengths, and then the red one, which is the upper wavelengths. Tetrachromats have a fourth cone, this kind of yellowish arc that we have here. And you'll notice in woman 1, this arc almost completely overlaps the red one, which means that cone isn't really doing anything different. So woman 1, although she's technically a tetrachromat, wouldn't actually perceive that many other colors or other shades. Whereas woman 2, who has that fourth cone right in the middle of the other two sets of cones, would perceive a ton of different colors. So some estimations are up to like 100 times more shades or something than other people. So this lady would actually see a ton of different shades and colors where other people couldn't. They could differentiate between like more shades of red and orange and yellows and greens than other people could, which I have to imagine is the coolest thing. So I'm fascinated with tetrachromacy. I think that would be so cool. Um, you can check it out more if you want. It's a neat thing. And that's it for today. It's a bit of a longer lecture. I apologize for that. But I hope you guys have a good rest of the day. Cheers.